Let's just jump right in. When you hear the name Scipio Africanus, Rome's absolute greatest general, you probably immediately picture the legendary Battle of Zama, right? But in this explainer, we're actually going to bypass that famous battlefield completely. Instead, we are looking into what I'd call a high-stakes historical heist. We're talking about the night Scipio burned two massive armies to the ground, and get this, he did it without fighting a pitched battle at all. It was a masterclass in how patience can completely dismantle brute force.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really appreciate Scipio's sheer brilliance here, you've got to understand the totally impossible odds he was up against. 90,000. That is a terrifying number. By the winter of 204 to 203 BCE, Scipio had successfully invaded North Africa, but his momentum just slammed into a brick wall. He was completely pinned down outside the city of Utica, and standing in his way, a massive combined Carthaginian and Numidian force led by Hasdrubal, Gisco, and King Syphax. They boasted about 90,000 guys. Scipio, he was sitting there with roughly 35,000. The enemy didn't even bother attacking him. They were perfectly happy to just camp nearby and wait him out. Rome's greatest general was literally backed into a corner.
So what exactly do you do when you're outnumbered almost 3-1? Well, if you're Scipio, you exercise a level of patience that is just mind-blowing. Honestly, his decision to sit and wait outside Utica wasn't cowardice. It wasn't military paralysis. It was actually the agonizing, deliberate patience of a calculated undercover operation. Look at how this played out. We go from being pinned down in the winter right into months, literally months, of completely fake peace negotiations. Then spring rolls around, bringing this elaborate, totally fabricated siege preparation. And all of that, it was just setting the stage for a devastating strike in the dead of night. He was playing a massive psychological long game, placing the pieces exactly where he wanted them.
To buy that crucial time, Scipio opened up those peace talks directly with King Syphax, and man, he let them drag on forever. But the whole thing was a front. It was a brilliant espionage operation. Every single time he sent envoys over to the enemy camps, he pulled off this incredible deception. He took his sharpest, most observant centurions, disguised them as slaves, and sent them along as mere porters. I mean, think about the audacity of that. Picture them making these very simple, deliberate movements, blending right in like regular laborers. While the official diplomats are up front talking terms and distracting the enemy commanders, Scipio's disguised officers are just casually walking through the camp in plain sight, meticulously memorizing the layout of the entire enemy base.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the critical piece of intel those undercover officers actually brought back. It turns out both enemy forces shared a fatal architectural flaw. When the spies looked at the Carthaginian camp, they saw the barracks were built out of reed, timber, and thatch. Then they checked the Numidian camp, also built out of reed, timber, and thatch. These two massive armies were basically living inside giant, highly flammable tinderboxes. It was just a mundane detail that the Carthaginians and Numidians probably never gave a second thought to. But for a cornered military genius like Scipio, that was the exact key to their absolute destruction.
Okay, so once he has the intelligence he needs, Scipio waits for spring. Then, boom, he abruptly breaks off the peace talks. But he knows he can't just attack directly. He needs the enemy looking the completely wrong way. So he orchestrates this absolutely grand misdirection. He puts on this massive, highly visible show of preparing to storm the city of Utica itself. We're talking loading heavy siege equipment onto his ships, moving his troops into these really prominent positions with very structured, obvious military movements. It was basically a giant theatrical performance put on for an audience of 90,000 enemies. And you know what? It worked perfectly. He drew every single enemy eye right toward those city walls. They were completely, entirely focused on this fake siege.
With the enemy's attention completely captured by Utica, the real threat just slips away unseen. That night, under the cover of absolute pitch-black darkness, Scipio marched his real army out. The whole siege prep was just a ghost story. The reality was marching through the dark. He took his forces and split them entirely in two. One half was led by his trusted commander Caius Laelius, along with Massinissa, a Numidian prince who had allied with Rome. They moved silently, essentially weaponizing the night against an enemy that thought they knew exactly where the Romans were.
Strike one of the night happens at King Syphax's camp. Remember those carefully scouted huts? The ones made of totally dried-out reed and thatch? Yeah, Caius Laelius and Massinissa hit the Numidian camp first and immediately set those highly flammable huts ablaze. In an instant, the dark night was just shattered. Can you even imagine the sheer, utter chaos erupting inside that camp? You've got tens of thousands of men waking up to a sudden inferno, trapped inside their own quarters, totally disorganized and completely defenseless against a fire that's rapidly consuming their fragile shelters.
So the crucial point here, the real turning point of the night, is how the neighboring Carthaginian camp reacted to this. They see this terrifying inferno lighting up the sky next door, and they completely misread the situation. They make a fatal assumption. They figure, oh, it's just a tragic accident, a terrible campfire that got out of control in the dry conditions. Rushing over to help their allies, the Carthaginian troops literally run toward the blaze half-armed. They aren't in formation. They aren't expecting an enemy. They are just rushing into the dark to put out a fire, completely unaware that the fire itself is the weapon.
And that is exactly what Scipio was waiting for in the shadows. As these half-armed, completely disorganized Carthaginians sprint blindly through the dark toward the raging fire, they run smack into Scipio's waiting main force. The trap officially springs. The Carthaginians were slaughtered in the dark before they even realized they were under attack. Both camps burned furiously. Both massive armies were shattered in a single, terrifying night. And the most incredible part of all of this? It was done without Rome ever having to fight a traditional pitched battle.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how mathematically devastating Scipio's strategy really was. Think about Hasdrubal Gisco. This guy started the night commanding a huge chunk of that 90,000-strong force. By the end of it, he fled 25 miles back to Carthage with barely 2,500 survivors. And King Syphax, he fared even worse. He managed to escape the inferno with just a tiny handful of cavalry. A force of 90,000 men was effectively erased from the map in a matter of hours. And they were largely destroyed by their own burning camp and their own fatal assumptions, all carefully orchestrated by Scipio.
You know, it is no wonder that the ancient historians who chronicled these events viewed this night with utter awe. Livy and Polybius both described the events at Utica as one of the most devastating single strokes of the entire war. It is a monumental victory that stands completely apart, because it wasn't won by the brute force of arms or thousands of shields clashing on a field. It happened almost entirely through masterful deception, incredible agonizing patience, and absolutely meticulous reconnaissance. Scipio proved once and for all that applied intelligence could be far deadlier than a drawn sword.
Which brings us to a fascinating final thought for you to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. The Battle of Zama. That's the one that gets all the statues, right? It gets all the glory, the chapters in the history books, the popular attention. But as we've uncovered today, Utica is where Scipio truly broke the back of the enemy forces in North Africa. Utica is where he proved the war was essentially already won. So if that's the case, why does history always seem to glorify the brute force and massive casualties of a pitched battle over the absolute tactical brilliance and deception we just explored? It's a pretty profound question about how we remember military genius. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you for the next explainer.